Brian Katcher explores a complicated romance between a teenage cishet boy from Missouri and a transgender teenage girl. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about transgender, being transgender and being from Missouri and running in track and things like that. I am referring to Almost Perfect by Brian Katcher, which was published in 2009. For those who don't know, Brian Katcher is an American writer, white American writer, who has been getting his work published for the past 20 or so years. He's written mostly a couple of books. I think this was either his debut novel or something close to it. And he primarily writes about relationships and things like that, young adult fiction, which given that this is a story about transgender ideology, certain people are going to get annoyed if it's aimed at young adults, and I will discuss that much more later on. I should also point out that this was on my TBR for the year, so I'm knocking another book off the list, and I did quite enjoy this, so I'm going to recommend it to you. But I'm also going to spoil it because it's hard to talk about it without spoiling it. But I also think if you're seeking this book out, you probably already know some of the spoilers, as I kind of knew about that. Even though it's also kind of described on the synopsis on the jacket cover, I think, as well. I say jacket cover, but I read it on like Amazon because I have a digital copy of the book. But yeah, I think Brian Katcher is an interesting writer. Although from what I gather, he is a cishet, white male, which feels very relevant to what to the events or like what's going on in this book. Like this might be a bit different if it was written by someone who is transgender or gay or bisexual or something like that. I don't really know much about Katcher, to be honest. I'm making a big guess that he's cisgender heterosexual. And it's not a bad thing for that kind of person to write this narrative. But again, it would be different if it was written by someone else. And that's important to know, which we'll talk about in the analysis section, as I've said. But without further ado, let's talk about Almost Perfect. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, or a lot of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Almost Perfect focuses on Logan. He is a high school student, graduating. He's a senior, living in rural Missouri at the start of his senior year. He's also a track student, comes from a poor background, lives in a trailer, and he lives with his single mother. He didn't really know his father, and that seems to be on his mind quite a bit. At the beginning of the story, we learned that he's dealing with a breakup. He was dating a girl named Brenda, which is a silly name for a teenager, I think. But they were dating for 3 years, didn't get intimate, and he always wondered why. He finds out that she cheated on him at the beginning of the story. He's kind of lonely and isolated, really trying to find companionship at the beginning of the story. And that's when, at the beginning of the story, we learned that there's a new student at school named Sage, very attractive girl. Who is a bit eccentric, kind of likes teasing Logan. They are in biology class, and they hit it off as they're dissecting frogs with one of Logan's friends. Those friends encourage him to ask out Sage because there seems to be an attraction, and he invites her to a movie date where they'll be with a couple of friends. She says she's hesitant to go, but she might be there, and she in fact does show up. They get kind of close in the darkness of the theater, almost kissing, but Sage reacts weirdly and pushes him away, and Logan doesn't know what he's done. He feels like he's made another mistake here, but A short while later, Sage says, she likes Logan, but what she needs right now is a friend. And Logan agrees to be that friend. They develop a good relationship over time, being extremely close. Logan's friends suspecting that they might be dating, but Logan says that they're not. But anytime that he gets really close, Sage says that she needs to keep him at a distance. She says that her family doesn't want her dating, and that her family is kind of restrictive. But Logan also notes that Sage's sister Tammy is allowed to date for some reason, and he doesn't quite understand what this all means. But during one time, they hang out at a cemetery, and Sage starts crying, and Logan consoles her and gives her a kiss. And at this point, Sage reveals that she was born a boy, but she is transgender, and that is why she is expressing herself as a girl right now. And Logan has a really bad reaction to this. He threatens to punch Sage, but doesn't do that. It's still wrong that he threatened to do that, kind of, affecting how he perceived this character. He calls Sage a butt pirate in his head. There's a whole bunch of things going on, and he even uses the F word at Sage, which upsets both of them, and they kind of break apart at that point. Their friendship is harmed by that. Logan is very lonely, but he can't tell anyone because he kissed Sage, and he's worried that people might perceive him as gay because of that. He's just like, I'm just going to keep her secret. And it's important to know he keeps referring to Sage as she, indicating that maybe his mind isn't completely there with the assumption that Sage is not a woman. But in order to kind of get some closure, he talks with Brenda about their relationship, and she notes that she never really liked Logan in that way, didn't want to push their relationship further, and there was just a huge gap between them, and Brenda doesn't really see herself as at fault for anything like that. And so Logan realizes, I guess there was never really anything between Brenda and me. And I've kind of been a jerk to Sage, so I should try to make amends there, which he does. And there's a bit of a reunion with Sage where they become closer friends, but Logan doesn't want anything else to develop between them, which Sage seems okay with because she needs a friend. And she thinks Logan is both pretty hot because he has a runner's body and just pretty special person. Logan ends up meeting Sage's dad, who is not accepting of Sage as a woman, as a teenage girl, and he doesn't really want this to go any further, and he's trying to be protective of Sage, and even says that if Logan does anything to muddy the waters for Sage, he's going to take Sage out of school and homeschool her again, and he's pretty threatening at the same time. Sage also reveals that she wants to transition. We find out that she's taking hormones, illegally procured hormones from Mexico, in order to allow the transition to happen, but she still needs to get surgery, which Logan doesn't really want to think about, but it's clear that Sage has been suicidal in the past and wants to see herself as a woman. And then a short while later, the school goes on a field trip to a pool. It's there that Logan sees Sage in a bikini with woman parts. Again, he finds out that she's on hormones, and she even shows him her naked body in a very steamy moment while at home when no one's around. And Logan sees that and is, runs away immediately and jerks off to her, which is kind of strange, but he is trying to get that out of his mind, but he can't seem to do so. At the same time, he decides that he wants to help Sage out and help her be able to go visit Mizzou. Her parents don't want her out, but Logan convinces his sister Laura, who is at Mizzou, to kind of pretend to be a college representative, which manages to trick Sage's family, and she's able to go to Mizzou for a college visit. And Sage wants Logan there, even though he doesn't want to be alone with her because he doesn't know what he's going to do. And so he decides to go along, but he wants to stay in someone else's room, one of Laura's friends. And when they go to Mizzou, they agree to just keep themselves as friends. Logan and Sage go to a frat party. Logan wants to leave with a girl named Erin, indicating that, things might get spicy between them, but he sees some frat boys being mean to Sage and sticks up for her and stays and drinks at the party for most of the evening. They end up leaving at 4 o'clock. Laura goes to her boyfriend's place to be alone, and Logan and Sage are alone in Laura's bedroom, and they end up having sex. Logan knows that he shouldn't, but he's like, I don't care anymore. I want to be with this person who I have good chemistry with. And then the next day, after he gets home, he finds out that Laura followed Sage into the bathroom to give her some clothes at one point and found out the truth about Sage and saw her penis. And Logan immediately hangs up on Laura and says some very mean things when she comes over to visit later, and actively misgenders Sage while Sage isn't around to prevent Laura from speculating that he might be gay or something like that. And he also breaks up with Sage even though they just had sex, because he doesn't want anyone to know what's going on there. He's not brave enough, he admits. They grow distant between each other, and in an effort to teach Logan a lesson, Sage goes out with one of the frat boys that she met at the party. But when he finds out that she is transgender, he beats her almost to death, but she manages to convince him that he's knocked out. Logan finds out about this and helps take her to the hospital. Her dad is unhappy and pushes him around a little bit, and we find out that Sage has been taken to a mental hospital because she's suicidal at this point. And Sage's dad allows Logan to go and meet her there. It's there that Sage says, this is the last time we're going to talk, and it's because I don't want you to see me as a boy, a man. I'm going to live as a man instead of a woman because I have a hard time as a transgender woman, and that's just how things are going to be. Logan is deeply unhappy. Is like, you're not going to be content with yourself. This is a bad choice. He gets really upset, and the mental hospital has to take him out of there. And we later find out that Sage has left town and hasn't given Logan a clue of where she's going. Logan ends up graduating and decides to start college, and he is just very sad about everything and feels like no one's going to stack up against Sage with how great that they felt together. And then he ends up receiving a letter from Sage where she admits that she's actually going to continue living as a woman, but she will never let Logan know where they are because she needs Logan to kind of move on. And there is kind of a hint that he's going to develop some sort of relationship afterwards. He just needs to sort of move on from everything, and it sort of ends right there. In terms of analysis, there is a lot to talk about with Almost Perfect. A lot of depth to the story, a lot of good and some bad, but ultimately a really solid story overall. Really compelling, and I was really drawn to the romance, even if there were some aspects that I thought didn't quite hold up. One of the big elements of the story is Logan, specifically Logan's perspective. The story is told first-person perspective, first-person view, in Logan's eyes, which is an interesting way to tell this type of story, because what Katcher is doing is he's writing Sage's coming-of-age story from Logan's perspective. You would think this kind of story would be written from Sage's perspective, but I think Katcher is trying to do a couple different things here, which I'll talk about. But it's really interesting because Logan is whiny and kind of pervy in the beginning of the story, really hard to root for, at least in the beginning. He's whining about how he broke up with someone, and he's like, ooh, this girl looks beautiful, and he's only thinking about women in terms of are they hot, can I have sex with them? Not too bad, but it's arguably there. And I get that this is how teenage boys think, but it is kind of jarring. Logan, it takes a while for me to be able to root for Logan, and the first half of the book is really hard to get into. I can understand why some people might drop this, but he's the classic teenage boy. And he's very lonely. Loneliness is kind of central to his identity, because we'll also find out that loneliness is central to Sage's identity for different reasons. He wants to feel seen. He wants human connection. His girlfriend just cheated on him, and he just wants to feel like there's someone he can be around who isn't just a regular friend. And that's something that I think all teenagers kind of feel. Katcher's really good at kind of capturing that there. And he manages to connect with Sage, who is feeling equally lonely, again, in different ways. Like Sage, wants somebody to love them. Sage wants to be loved, wants to be seen as a woman, and Logan is doing that in the beginning, and even after they kind of have their nasty spat, where he's hateful towards her, and they come back together. Like he's one of the few people who sees her as a woman and respects her and fights for her, which is not something that she really has at home, as her parents, struggle to understand her identity. But unfortunately, when it matters most, like Logan is hateful towards Sage. Like she comes out to him, and he's like, "You tricked me." Like he uses the F word specifically, which is not good. You are a liar, and I feel defrauded. By you in that way. The typical way that people negatively react towards transgender people. And there is some truth that Sage probably should have said that at first, but how do you come out and say that kind of thing? It's really difficult. And at least she didn't let the relationship proceed too far before she kind of announced that. And it's also fair that like Logan wasn't really being a good person, because he was just kissing all over Sage while she was crying and didn't really bother to ask the real tough questions there. I do think there is some redemption for Logan when he stands up and tries to defend Sage, and also knowing that he's a teenage boy from Missouri. I think there's some part of me that wants to redeem Logan as well, because I see so much of myself in Logan. I was a teenage boy from the Midwest once. I have goodness in my heart, and I'm capable of doing bad things because I didn't really understand the world around me. But I tried to learn more, and I got better. And I think that's what's happening to Logan in this story. Now I know a lot of things about the transgender community, and I advocate for LGBT individuals whenever I get a chance. But I do feel I could have ended up in Logan's situation, where I had feelings for somebody that I didn't really know how to have feelings for. That forced me to confront truths about myself that I wasn't ready to confront. And I could have been in his situation. I want to pretend like I've always been the way that I am. But if you grow up in the isolated rural Midwest, like in a time where the internet is not prevalent and you don't have opportunities to look up this information, it can be a pretty big challenge. That's not to make what Logan does okay or what I might have done okay, but it is understandable. This was written in 2009, so for 2009, Logan is a pretty interesting, fascinating character there. If this had been written now, I would probably be like, you don't get credit for writing this in this day and age, when so many trans narratives have come out. But in 2009, there weren't as many, and that's an important element of the story, an important piece of historical data. It's also important to note that Logan is very oblivious to himself, not really comprehending that he's causing many of the problems for himself. Like he blames Sage for the attraction, which is weird. Like he's like, oh, like Sage is making me feel this way. Like she's alluring me and things like that. At one point he's like, I'm worried about what's going to happen if I'm alone with Sage, what she's going to do. But it takes two to tango, to use that cliche. Like sure, like Sage wants to be with Logan because he's hot, and like he is like Logan is providing a comfort that she hasn't had before. But Logan also wants this, so whether he realizes or not, subconsciously, like he has been so lonely for so long, and Sage is providing a comfort, a companionship that he just hasn't had, and he's drawn to that. He wants that. He wants her body, he wants her form, he wants that passion of being with her, something that he wasn't getting in his previous relationship or through much of his high school career, his high school academic career. Like it's normal to want someone in that way, but Logan can't comprehend that he wants someone in that way, possibly because he's so young. He doesn't have the language to kind of understand that. He's bound to make a lot of mistakes as a teenager and as a young adult. Unfortunately, these mistakes are very bad in how he's treating people. It's also kind of funny in how oblivious he is, because how he kind of cognitively distances himself from all of this. It ends up creating kind of hilarious writing. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "I had to be Iceman this weekend. Mr. Cool. Sage and I would talk on the drive to Columbia. I'd ask her, for the sake of our friendship, not to come on to me again. She'd do that for me, I was sure. When we got to campus, I'd stay with Laura's friends, hang out with the girls, but not be too chummy with Sage. My sister would just think she was a classmate of mine I'd asked out once. By Sunday afternoon, Sage would be back to being just another transgendered girl who I'd share secrets and saliva with." And that's just a really fascinating quote, because he's like, I gotta be a cool customer. I gotta be chill when I'm around Sage, which is a lack of self-awareness, because he is absolutely not that. He panics when he is around Sage. And he's like, like my sister won't think that I'm anything with Sage at all. But like he's going to a college visit with this girl, which you don't just do with anyone. Like Laura's smart enough to realize that there's something much more there with Logan, but he can't comprehend that, or he's tricked himself into believing something like that. And then he's like, by Sunday afternoon, she'll be just another transgender girl who I'd shared secrets and saliva with. Which, like, there's two things there. First, just another transgender girl. This is the first time you've been in that sort of relationship, Logan. Like, this is a much bigger thing than you're, like, thinking about here. You're just, hand waving it and saying it's nothing, but this is significant. And, he's saying, like, I shared secrets and saliva with. That's not just another person. That's a romance. That's something big there. You don't just share secrets with anyone, and you don't just share saliva with anyone. I get that Katcher's trying to be funny here, and he succeeds. But it's also funny in showing how oblivious Logan is, and how he just leads himself to these situations that he says he doesn't want to be in, but he ends up in. And ultimately, what's the case is that Logan wants to be with Sage, and he's putting himself in these situations and trying not to take the blame, which is very much wrong. Like, he's placing the blame on Sage, and that's not a fair thing to do. But thankfully, Logan does become self-aware, and he learns from these situations. Like when he breaks up with Sage, he's like, "Yeah, I've been a coward. I've been irresponsible. I'm just like my dad who wasn't there." That's him becoming aware that he's been the problem. And then, when Sage moves away, he's like, I fucked things up for myself, and that was, I took the wrong route in getting to where I was, and I hurt Sage, and I hurt myself, and I only have myself to blame. So it's a comprehension. It does also come off as like, oh, poor little, cishet white boy at times. It's like he's the victim in all of this rather than Sage, who he treated poorly. There's an attempt to kind of get him off the hook there, but I will give Katcher credit that he doesn't just let Logan off the hook in this story. Like, Logan is given the blame here. Like, Logan is seen as wrong in every aspect. He's not allowed to just get off the hook. Like, even in Sage's final letter, like, she's like, you treated me bad, but we had something here, and that counts for something, and you treated me better than anyone else had treated me. So like, there is some redeeming qualities, but Logan isn't completely off the hook. Like, he does some pretty heinous things that stick with you in this story, which I'll talk a little bit about more a little bit later. But again, it's too late for Logan to learn. It's a very tragic ending for him. It's going to affect him for a long while that he missed out on this pretty great romance that he had chemistry with someone. Like, he might date other girls, but by his own acknowledgement, he's always going to be measuring them up against Sage, and Sage was, a one of a kind character. You can't duplicate that. Pretty unfortunate ending, even if Katcher does kind of want to paint it as very optimistic in some ways. Katcher is also touching upon the intersection of gender, sexuality, and romance in this story. He really leans into the complicated nature of life. There's people who want to say that, gender is one way, it's binary, boy and girl, and that's it. Conservatives want to say that. It's in the news all the time today, and they demonize trans people for a number of different reasons. And they also want to say, there's only heterosexuality, that's the only way to go. But there's so much more complexity to that. Logan at the beginning of the story thinks it's just black and white. You either like girls or you're a homosexual. You're either a boy or a girl. There's no room for nuance in Logan's perspective, which is understandable because, again, he's growing up in rural Missouri where there's not a lot of discussion about those sort of things, especially in 2009. If you are gay or trans in Missouri in those times, you often hid it like Sage does at the beginning of the story. And there's the question that is brought up, like, if Logan likes Sage, what does that make him? Logan doesn't want to face that because, when Sage reveals that she's transgender to Logan is like, oh, I kissed you? Oh God, if people find out, that's bad. And then after he has sex with Sage and wants to be in a relationship with her, and Laura finds out, he doesn't want to, have that kind of discussion with Laura because she's only going to think of it as, oh, Logan's gay, and that's it. There's no nuance to that. And Logan can't really sit with those feelings. And also because of his limited perception of how things are, like he doesn't know what that is. There's plenty of people who fall for people of the similar gender, who fall for transgender people, who fall for people who are non-binary or nowhere near there on the gender spectrum. There's a lot of genders, there's a lot of sexualities and things like that. There's bisexuality, which I think is kind of where Logan might be leaning, or there's just another term for what Logan might be, but he can't think of that. And I think it's interesting that Katcher kind of points this out and is kind of illustrating that things are not so black and white. And to behave as Logan is doing is kind of a bit of toxic masculinity, utilizing the sort of perceptions in the media and whatnot to kind of be brutal towards Laura, be brutal towards Sage in order to reinforce his own, or reinforce how society looks at him. He's not gay. He's not weaker for having sex with someone who is transgender. He's above that. That is just something that happened to him, and God forbid anyone ever find out about that. I do think it's really good that Katcher is writing about this. Because the story is aimed at teenagers, this is a very important message to send to teenagers, people who are at a very complicated point in their life. Complicated in terms of gender, who they're attracted to, how their gender is perceived, how they engage in romance and things like that. It's very important to let teenagers know that there is not simply just a binary. It's not one or the other. There's so many different layers and so many complications. That's not always going to make teenagers feel good. There's never going to be an exact term for who or what they are, what they like, or things like that. But it's helpful to know. It makes you feel less bad if you know that society or the world is more complicated than what your parents or what conservatives would have you believe. So this is a very amazing book in that regard, that especially for 2009, that tries to get people to understand that there's nothing wrong with being transgender. There's nothing wrong with being having the kind of feelings that Logan has in here. But I will note that saying that kind of stuff is why this book is one of the more banned books. As I think I mentioned earlier, this is like pretty high on the list of banned books, especially in this recent sort of satanic panic that we have going on, where we're demonizing transgender people and trying to say that, conservative people are like, they're indoctrinating the youth into LGBT culture and things like that, even though people are just more aware of, all these things. And it's good, because if you try to enforce rigid societal standards on young people, it's going to hurt them. It has hurt them. We've seen it hurt these individuals. And conservatives definitely want to ban it because it openly challenges their ideology. It openly challenges that, parents might not know best, as Sage's father doesn't know best in this story. And sometimes you might be the better arbiter of who you are or what you want to be in life. And, it's important to have friends who understand you and connect with you, and even if that might put you at odds with your family. So I can see why it's banned, and I can see that there's a whole lot of complicated aspects of gender and romance in this story. There are also several other amazing things. I can see this video is like 30 minutes at the time that I'm talking, and this video is going to be as long as it needs to be because there's a lot to discuss. But one of the interesting things is the use of pronouns in this story. Like Logan will often use the she pronoun, like even when he feels like he was tricked at the beginning of the story, like he still uses she pronouns because he views Sage as a woman, and she is a woman. Whereas Sage's dad, up until like a pivotal moment later in the story where he's like, oh no, what have I done? I've hurt my child. Like he uses he pronouns, which, Logan rightfully notes feels wrong. Feels like it doesn't actually get at the fact that Sage is like her father's daughter and deserves to be treated with respect and acknowledgement of the woman that she's trying to be. I think Katcher does some pretty good things with these pronouns in the story. I also like the chemistry of the romance here. Like I really like want to see like Sage and Logan make it, because they're pretty passionate together. They seem like nice people. They deserve to be happy, and they really found each other at the loneliest point in their lives. And there's something beautiful happening here of a great friendship. Like there's a point in the book where they're arguing in a McDonald's, and they start imitating each other, and Logan's like, I'm Sage and I'm very dramatic, and I make trouble for myself, and Logan's like, Sage is like, I'm Logan, and I can't accept the reality that's in front of me, and I linger on past relationships. And they're really getting at like the frustrations and the insecurities of each other, but in a very friendly way that feels like there's major like character development happening here, major sort of help on both sides of them trying to get each other to a good and positive place, even if they do have like complicated emotions and things about one another. And then in conjunction with that, there's the sex scene in the book is very well written. Like much of the time I feel like sex scenes in books, maybe it's just because I haven't read good romance before, I feel like it's kind of cringe at times, and very hard to portray in a written sense, as opposed to maybe a sex scene in a movie. But here I think it's done really well. It gets at the loneliness, gets at the eagerness for them to kind of be with each other, the passion that they're experiencing, the joy that they're experiencing, Logan realizing, yes, this is absolutely what I want, I will not deny myself any longer, and Sage feeling presumably the same thing there. I think it's really well done, and it's one of the better parts of the story. It's just unfortunate, like it's the emotional apex of the story, and then right there, like everything afterward is going to be awful, and it's gonna be sad, and it's going to break your heart, and that's in fact what the book does. There are other interesting elements that are worth exploring, like Sage's hidden past and the lengths we go to try to hide our past, and what happens when we meet someone who's willing to accept the parts of our past that we don't like to talk about. Being a trans narrative in 2009 is also interesting as well. You didn't really see a lot of those. You saw a fair few, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. I feel like at some point around 2013, after Oberfell, that case and whatnot, there began to be more narratives, and the media began portraying gay narratives, LGBT narratives more often. This predates Orange is the New Black, which had a trans narrative in there. So I do think this is pretty fascinating, and it's important to be judged in the time that it happened, where again, if this came out today, we'd say, it's not doing enough, it's doing the bare minimum. But here, like, you might think that, but like this is still going way further than any narrative of its type went during that time, and I feel like that's very vital, and it's one of the reasons I really like this book. Like, even if it is doing the bare minimum, like, it's still doing a lot. Like, Katcher's really trying. He's really doing his research, and that's an important thing to do. Like, this isn't like just Katcher writing a willy-nilly, trans narrative for fun. He's actually done the research. He's taken care. There are parts that aren't so kosher at times, but it's really well done. But of course, there's a number of problems that I've been kind of alluding to. I do think the first half, the beginning of the story, is kind of bad in terms of Logan being whiny, being a horny teenager, which is, just who his character is, focusing too much on how beautiful Sage is. And she's like, I like you as a friend. And he's like, I'm ready to be a friend. And he still sexualizes her, which is kind of weird. He just comes off as kind of, a real chode at times. There's a lot of over-sexualization as well. To the point of fetishization of transgender people. I do think that's kind of an issue with the way that Katcher's constantly describing Sage's beauty, but also reminding us that Sage is transgender. It's not enough that Sage is beautiful, you also have to kind of constantly point at that, which, again, this is in Logan's head, so I would understand where that's coming from, but I do think it borders on fetishization at times, which is a real problem in the transgender community. It also seems a little bit of transphobic at times. Katcher is leaning into transphobia instead of to teach. He's just doing it as oh, this is another bad thing that's happening to Sage, which can be pretty horrific to read, especially if you're transgender. This is just a set dressing for a thing that happens to you every day, or something like that. The things that Logan says to Sage when he finds out the truth about her, about who she is, are really unsettling, and in a way it's almost irredeemable. I think Katcher manages to get out of that hole, but he's dug a pretty deep hole for Logan. These are some pretty awful things that he's been saying to Sage, and it's also important to note, the background of the writer. If Katcher were transgender or part of the LGBT community, I can see this being oh, this is him trying to kind of paint the world. But given that Katcher isn't LGBT, as far as I know, it's really weird how he's writing Logan, and how he's writing Sage. This is a cishet white person's perception of all of this. I think, again, it's good that Katcher did his research, but it's still weird that who's kind of telling this story. And I think because of that, I'm specifically talking about how it's written from Logan's perspective. You're telling, as I said before, he's telling a coming of age story about a transgender person through the eyes of someone who is not transgender, who is a cishet white male from rural Missouri. And I know, again, so Katcher is trying to do that because he's trying to get us in the mind of Logan, and I think he's specifically trying to write this for young adult males who might be in this kind of situation, and so they can easily get themselves in the mind of Logan if they realize, oh, I'm just like this person. So I can understand why he's writing from Logan's perspective in that way, and I also understand the story really doesn't work if it's told from Sage's perspective, because it's really about Logan more so than it's about Sage. Because if the story is about Logan, we focus on Logan's mind and his character development over time, and how he changes his perception of who Sage is, and his perception of what womanhood is. But we don't really find out much about Sage in the process, which is unfortunate. We see Sage through Logan's eyes, so there's a lot of assumptions probably being made there. But if the story is told through Sage's eye, yes, we do get more about Sage, which would probably be more important, I would argue. But at the same time, it doesn't really work because we would be told from a first person's perspective what's happening, or what Logan is doing and whatnot through Sage's eyes, but we wouldn't know about his shift in his mind. It would just seem oh, one day he's suddenly accepting of Sage or something like that. So we wouldn't really see how he develops and how his mindset changes and the frustrations that he feels, especially near the end of the story. So I get why Katcher is writing it this way. In a world where so many stories, Black narratives in particular, stories of minorities, where so many of them are told from the perspective of those with privilege, this feels like another one of those in many ways. And you could have told this from the perspective of the minority, of the person who is not advantaged, of a person who feels all the strife that society wants to deliver to them, and it feels like a drop ball, but also the story ends up working. Like, this could have failed and floundered so hard and been, another on the trash heap of stories that try to connect with disadvantaged communities and end up failing, and it doesn't do that. I think it manages to work. It manages to really hit you pretty hard. Maybe that's just because of my my status in the world. Maybe it's because I really connect with the story as a cisgender white male from a rural state. And if I had been transgender or anything else, maybe the story wouldn't have hit as hard. But that's just my review, and that's just my perspective. You might have a different perspective if you read the book. You might hate it. You might think it's nowhere near as good as I necessarily think it is. But I guess all art is meant to evoke, emotions in some way, and it's made me feel a certain set of emotions there. Anyway, those are my long, complicated, very windy thoughts on Almost Perfect by Brian Katcher. I really enjoyed it. I strongly suggest that you go out and find it. Maybe find it at your local library. I wasn't able to find it there, but perhaps at a larger library you might be able to find it. Or maybe find it at your local bookstore or something similar to that. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. This seems like a book that's rife for having conversation and discussing very powerful things. So, let me know below. Otherwise, don't forget to share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author, which I really want more people to do, because I haven't really been able to find a lot of newer sort of conversations about the book. And the Wikipedia page for it is non-existent, so I can't really get more information about that. I'm sure if I hung out in LGBT circles, maybe I might be hearing about this book more often. But unfortunately, I do not hang out in those circles. I should probably change that sometime. But yeah, other than that, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and supporting the transgender community related travels. Farewell.